Here we are in Chapter 5, Preventing Violence and Injury. Violence accounts for many of the health problems that are faced in the U.S., and it comes in many forms, such as abuse of spouses and children, homicide and other violent attacks on others, shootings in schools, acts of terrorism. Interpersonal violence is a problem that has really come to national attention. And in this chapter, we're going to focus on the problems of violence within our culture. We're going to look at some data that is going to help us to understand the scope of the problem. Perhaps give us some clues to the antecedents of violence and knowledge that may help us prevent it. We're also going to look at and be able to differentiate between intentional and unintentional injuries and understand ways to minimize the risks and effect of unintentional injury. Violence is the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. The U.S. Public Health Service has categorized violence resulting in injuries into two categories. Intentional injuries, those committed with intent to harm, typically include assaults, homicides, self-inflicted injuries, and suicides. And unintentional injuries, those committed without intent to harm, such as motor vehicle crashes, fires, drownings. Young adults are disproportionately affected by violence and injury. Unintentional injuries are the number one cause of death among 15 to 44-year-olds. And suicide and homicide are second and third leading causes of death in 15 to 34-year-olds. Unintentional injuries from motor vehicle crashes in particular are the number one cause of death among 15 to 44-year-olds in the U.S. And according to the FBI, the violent crime rate fell by 10% between 2012 and 2014, but increased by 1.7% in 2015 and 5.3% in the first half of 2016. Violent crimes involve force or threat and include murder, non-negligent manslaughter or forcible rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. Two methods are used to record crime: the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program and the Bureau of Justice's Statistics National Crime Victimization Survey. Huge disparities in crime rates based on sex, race, age, socioeconomic status, location, crime type, and other factors. More than 54% of violent victimizations are not reported to police. More than 54%. So even though we're getting those, the FBI's crime reports and the National Crime Victimization Survey, more than 54% aren't even reported to those. The most deadly mass shooting in U.S. history took place at Virginia Tech, killing 32 people. Rape, hate crimes, and other violations are reported on campuses across the country at astronomical rates. Today, it would be hard to find a campus without a safety plan in place, ours included. Relationship violence is one of the most prevalent problems on college campuses, with about 10.9% of women and 6.4% of men reported being emotionally abused in the last 12 months. About 6.6% of women and 2.4% of men report being stalked. I believe these numbers are greatly underreported. Fewer than 12.5% of rapes and 4.3% of sexual batteries are believed to have been reported to any authority. Why aren't these being reported? Well, some of the reasons include concerns over privacy, fear of retaliation, embarrassment, a lack of support or perception that the crime was too minor, or they were somehow at fault, or an uncertainty that it was even a crime at all. This is pretty alarming when we look at the crime clock here, and that every 41.3 seconds an aggravated assault occurs. Every 1.6 minutes there's a robbery, every 4.2 minutes a rape, and every 33.5 minutes a murder takes place. Several social, community, relationship, and individual factors increased the likelihood of violent acts. So community context, societal factors, religious beliefs and differences, political differences, breakdowns in the criminal justice system, stress, depression, and other mental health issues, a lot of which we are seeing at elevated levels in our society today. So what makes some people prone to violence? Well, anger and aggression. Aggressive behavior is often a key aspect of violent interactions. Primary aggression is goal-directed. It's hostile self-assertion that is destructive by nature. Reactive aggression is more often part of an emotional reaction brought about by frustrating life experiences. Anger is a well-known catalyst for violence. It typically occurs when there is a triggering event, or when a person has learned that acting out in angry ways can get him or her what they want. People who anger quickly often have a low tolerance for frustration. The cause may be genetic or environmental. But just because we have a genetic predisposition, just because we come from an aggressive background, it's not causation. There's a correlation, and there's a difference. Substance abuse is another factor, and about 40% of all violent crimes include alcohol as a factor. Research suggests higher rates of alcohol use and violence in some athlete populations compared to non-athlete populations. Suicide and suicide attempts are highly correlated to drug and alcohol intake. Again, not causation. A does not equal B, but A is associated with B. And we can talk about that more in class as well. So although early studies supported a link between the violent media and subsequent violent behavior, recent work is failing to support this association. However, there's been some meta-analysis, so taking multiple research points into consideration, and it is indicating that playing violent video games may increase risks of aggression and desensitize people when violence occurs. So we're seeing an all-time low in violent crimes among youth, but there's also a desensitization that's happening, so people aren't as affected by it as they were. It's more of just kind of like, yeah, it happened. So that's something to be wary of as well. Interpersonal violence involves using physical force or power, threatened or actual. to inflict harm on an individual that results in injury, death, or psychological harm. Examples include homicide, hate crimes, domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse, and sexual victimization. Collective violence refers to violence committed by groups against other groups. Examples include gang violence, terrorism, and other violent acts related to political, governmental, religious, cultural, or social clashes. Homicide is defined as murder or non-negligent manslaughter, killing of another human. It's the 13th leading cause of death in the United States. It is among the top 5 causes of death for people aged 1 to 44. Top 5 in people aged 1 to 44. That always gets me. Nearly half of all homicides occur among people who know one another. Homicide rates reveal clear disparities across race, gender, and age. I don't love this graphic at all, but it really does seem to get the point across of homicide in the United States by weapon type, as reported in 2015. And as you can see, firearms were 8,653 victims claimed by homicide using a firearm. Now, it is not a gun that picked itself up off of a table and aimed itself at someone. So that statement of guns don't kill people, people kill people is still true. However, just looking at this graph, it seems to make it a whole heck of a lot easier, right? Because from 8,653, it drops down to 1,716, down to knives and a cutting instrument, and then down to 858, and so on. So I think that's a pretty big jump and something to be aware of. Right, with the ease of firearm killing someone. A hate crime is a crime committed against a person, property, or a group of people that is motivated by the offender's bias against race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or ethnicity. Hate crimes declined to 5,479 incidents in 2014, according to the FBI. Ethnoviolence, bias-motivated crimes, is violence based on prejudice and discrimination among ethnic groups in the larger society. Prejudice is an irrational attitude of hostility directed against an individual, a group, a race, or the supposed characteristics of an individual, group, or race. Discrimination constitutes actions that deny equal opportunity, equal treatment to a group of people based on prejudice. So we can take a look at this graph here. Bias-motivated crimes in 2015, reported in 2015 on single bias incident. So the number of crimes fueled by specific violence, and the number one bias-motivated crimes are race, then followed by religion, sexual orientation, and so forth. So it's really important to understand that there are these bias-motivated crimes continuing to happen. Again, we're seeing a lot of this in our society today. So some of the common reasons given to explain these hate crimes, I am not in any way justifying, but these are reasons given by those that are partaking in the hate crimes. So thrill-seeking, feeling threatened by somebody who is unlike them, retaliation, fearing the unknown. And so for some, hate crimes are part of their mission in life, owing to religious zeal or distorted moral beliefs. And we can look back on those sort of like cult behaviors. And people are become conditioned to believe that what they are doing is correct by oppressing another human, which I'm hoping all of you viewing this do have a better understanding and knowing that that's never okay. Gangs are believed to be responsible for 48% of U.S. violent crimes overall, and as much as 90% in some locations. Gangs give members a sense of self-worth, companionship, security, excitement, as well as economic incentives. Gangs are linked to alien smuggling, human trafficking, prostitution, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, shootings, beatings, thefts, and carjackings. And risk factors include friendship with delinquent peers, lack of parental monitoring, negative life events, alcohol and drug use, low self-esteem, academic problems, low socioeconomic status, alienation from family and society, a history of family violence, and living in gang-controlled neighborhoods. Terrorism is the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian populations, or any segment within for furtherance of political or social objectives. Over the past decade, the CDC created the Emergency Preparedness and Response Division to monitor potential public threats, health threats with problems with bioterrorism, chemical emergencies, radiation emergencies, mass casualties, national disaster, and severe weather. They develop a plan for mobilizing communities in case of emergency and provide information about terrorist threats. So you can find a lot of that information on the CDC's website. Domestic violence has historically referred to the use of force to control and maintain power over another person in the home environment. Domestic violence can occur between parent and child, between spouses or intimate partners, or between siblings or other family members. It may involve emotional abuse, verbal abuse, threats of physical harm, and actual physical violence. The term domestic violence is slowly being replaced by more specific categories of violence and violence that may not occur in the home. Intimate partner violence describes physical, sexual, or psychological harm done by a current or former partner or spouse and doesn't have to occur within the home. Intimate partner abuse can take the form of constant criticism, humiliation, verbal attacks, displays of explosive anger meant to intimidate, and controlling behaviors. Each year, millions of women and men are victims of rape, physical and psychological abuse, stalking, and other intimate partner offenses. Homicide by a current or former intimate partner is the leading cause of death of pregnant women in the United States. And 75% of all murder-suicides in the U.S. involve an intimate partner. 75%. This cycle of intimate partner violence was developed by psychologist Lenore Walker, and it consists of three major phases: tension building, incident of acute abuse or battering, and remorse or reconciliation. So there's a cycle, right? It'll go up, like we'll build. There'll be an explosion. And then there's kind of like this honeymoon phase, and we're going to come back together, and I'm going to be really sorry, and we're going to make up, and then we're going to go back into tension building, And it's going to build, and then there's going to be an explosion, and round it goes. There is no single predicating factor that explains abuse within relationships. There are a multitude of reasons that have been given, but there is no, again, causation. Child maltreatment is defined as any act or series of acts of commission or omission by a parent or caregiver that results in harm, potential harm, or threat of harm to a child. Child abuse refers to acts of commission, which are deliberate or intentional words or actions that cause harm, potential harm, or threat of harm to the child, right? It just needs to be a threat of harm to a child to be considered child maltreatment. Neglect is an act of omission, meaning a failure to provide a child's basic physical, emotional, or educational needs, or to protect a child from harm or potential harm. In 2015, there were 315,000 reported cases of child sexual abuse in the United States. Now remember how many cases go unreported of these crimes. 90% of child sexual abuse victims know their perpetrator. It's typically a family member or a close friend of the family. Youth who have been sexually abused are, correlation, not causation, 25% more likely to experience teen pregnancy, 30% more likely to abuse their own children, and much more likely to have problems with alcohol abuse or drug addiction. We can see in this chart here the rate per 1,000 children of child abuse and neglect by age. And can we just look for a moment at the children under 1 year of age? That is the highest rate of child abuse and neglect are by children under 1 year of age. I don't believe, I wish these numbers were all at zero, but that's not our facts, and our system needs to change greatly. Each year, hundreds of thousands of adults over the age of 60 are abused, neglected, or financially exploited. Many victims don't report abuse because they're embarrassed, or they don't want the abuser to get in trouble or retaliate by putting them in a nursing home or escalating the abuse. By 2030, the number of people aged over 65 will exceed 71 million. It's going to double from the number in the year 2000. We need to start taking care of our elderly. It's really, really important to reduce this abuse and neglect. Sexual victimization refers to any situation in which an individual is coerced or forced to comply with or endure another's sexual acts or overtures. It can run the gamut from harassment to stalking to assault and rape. Both men and women are susceptible, and young people are even more so. Sexual assault is any act in which one person is sexually intimate, ranging from simple touching to forceful penetration with another person without that person's consent. Considered to be the most extreme form of sexual assault, rape is defined as a penetration without the victim's consent. Aggravated rape is rape involving one or multiple attackers, strangers, weapons, or physical beatings. Simple rape is rape perpetrated by one person whom the victim typically knows and does not involve a physical beating or the use of a weapon. Nearly 1 in 5 women and 1 in 59 men had been raped at some time in their lives, with nearly 80% of female rape victims experiencing their first rape before the age of 25. Acquaintance rape refers to any rape in which the rapist is known to the victim, even if only minimally. Alcohol and rape-facilitated drugs like GHB, ketamine, and Rohypnol frequently involved in acquaintance rape. It's also known as date rape. 20% of undergraduate women have been sexually assaulted during their undergraduate years. The Clery Act of 1990 requires institutions to collect and report sexual crimes on their campuses. It also required institutions to address victims' rights, disciplinary procedures, and educational programs. The Campus Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights, known as the Ramstad Act of 92, gives victims the right to call off-campus authorities to investigate serious campus crimes, and requires universities to develop educational programs and notify students of available counseling. So if a crime occurs on campus and campus wants, or within campus, within anybody at school, and school says we have to maintain this within our school jurisdiction, that is not true. You have a right to contact outside authorities. Marital rape is defined as any unwanted intercourse or penetration between spouses obtained by force, by threat of force, or when the spouse is unable to consent. Many states still allow the exemption of marital rape prosecution. Women raised in cultures where male dominance is the norm, as well as pregnant, separated, and divorced women, all have higher rates of forced sex within the confines of marriage. When women under age 25 and from lower socioeconomic groups are at a much higher risk. There are multiple contributors to sexual violence, such as trivialization, like, is it really a crime? Blaming the victim, right? She either wore too short of a skirt, she was asking for it. On the flip side, pressure to be macho. Yeah, she wants it. Go for it. Get her. Male socialization, easy for me to say. Male misperceptions, and situational factors. So there's a multitude of social contributors to sexual violence. Sexual harassment is defined as unwelcome sexual contact that is related to any condition of employment, education, or performance evaluation. Sexual harassment can affect both men and women. Most schools and companies have sexual harassment policies in place, as well as procedures for dealing with those harassment problems. Peers can harass one another too. If something doesn't feel right to you, you don't have to tolerate it. There are things that you can do. I encourage you to be assertive. Tell the harasser to stop. Document the harassment. Try to make sure you are not alone with the harasser. If someone's making you uncomfortable, don't be alone with them. Complain to a higher authority. And remember, you haven't done anything wrong. Stalking is defined as a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear. It may include repeated visual or physical proximity, someone just in your face all the time, non-consensual written or verbal communication, and implied or explicit threats. Stalking that occurs online is referred to as cyberstalking. College students are much more likely to be stalked than the general public by about 200%. Sexual abuse of children by adults or older children includes sexually suggestive conversations, inappropriate kissing, touching, petting, oral anal or vaginal intercourse and other kinds of sexual interaction. Girls are more commonly abused than boys, although boys are also frequent victims. 90% of child sexual victims know their perpetrators in some way, with nearly 70% of kids abused by family members, usually an adult male. Children who experience sexual abuse are at increased risk for anxiety disorders, depression, eating disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicide attempts. It is far better to prevent a violent act than it is to recover from it. Assault can occur no matter what preventive actions that you take. Self-defense is a process that includes increasing your awareness, developing self-protective skills, taking reasonable precautions, and having the judgment necessary to respond quickly to changing situations. If you are in a violent situation, speak in a strong voice. Maintain eye contact. Stand up straight, act confident, and remain alert. Yelling fire if you're attacked, because that's going to draw more attention to yourself. Being as loud as you possibly can. In the event of rape occurring, it's important to call 911 and not cleaning yourself, right? The survivor of a rape attack should not bathe, shower, douche, clean themselves, because that's part of the evidence collection that needs to happen in order for the perpetrator to be brought to justice. Save the clothes that you are wearing. Don't launder them. Bringing them with you to the clinic or the hospital. Contacting rape assistance hotline in your area. Typically, they will have rape advocates at the hospital for you to help you walk through all of this process. I was a rape advocate for a long time, and so I would sit with the survivors of rape as this process occurred, so that they had somebody that was there for them to help them feel safe. If you know someone that's been assaulted, believe the rape victim. Encourage them to see a doctor immediately and to report the crime to the police. Be understanding. Recognize that this is a highly emotional situation and that it may take time for the person to bounce back. And encourage that person to seek out counseling. That's truly very important, is to provide support for the survivor of this type of a crime. So many college admins have been proactive in establishing violence prevention policies and programs and services on campus. Prevention and early response efforts include emergency messaging systems, email alerts, reverse 911 systems, and other things that are in place. There's a lot of changes that go on in campuses, so campus lighting, parking lot security, emergency call boxes, stepped up security. Our campus here is pretty small, but I've been on, the larger campuses, and there's typically like a blue light phone in case of an emergency that goes directly to campus police. So campus police are typically responsible for emergency responses. And they have the power to enforce laws with students in the same way they are handled in the general community as a whole. And that's talking more so on like larger campuses. So how are we going to prevent violence? Well, we start by preventing it in our home and protecting our children against violence in the home. Developing policies and laws that prevent violence. Develop skills-based educational programs. Begin early to help youth develop self-esteem and confidence. promote tolerance and acceptance, improve community services, and improve community-based supports, improve safety of recreation and athletic facilities. We want to have outlets for people and places for them to go rather than violent situations. We're going to shift our directive from violence to unintentional injuries, which occur without planning or intention to harm. The two types of unintentional injuries that cause the most deaths every year are drug overdoses and motor vehicle accidents. In 2016, motor vehicle crashes caused over 41,000 deaths. Impaired driving due to alcohol, marijuana, drugs and distractions, use of electronics, contributed to the 6% increase since 2015. In 2014, 726 people died in cycling accidents and 50,000 were injured. Nearly 1/3 of all motor vehicle accident fatalities involve a drunk or alcohol-impaired driver. Alcohol and marijuana are the drugs most often linked to impaired driving. Many researchers contend that driving while sleep deprived, we talked about this last week, is as dangerous as driving drunk. Distractions also come into play, and 3 types of activities constitute distracted driving: taking your eyes off the road, taking your hands off of the steering wheel, and taking your mind off driving. We need to be mindful while we are operating that big vehicle. Texting is one of the most dangerous forms of distracted driving. Some other safety issues when operating a vehicle. Wearing a safety belt, a seat belt, cuts the risk of serious injuries in a crash by almost half. Vehicles with high crash safety ratings also make driving safer. Improve your driving skills. Risk management driving techniques reduce the chances of being involved in a collision and include not using your electronics while driving. Don't drink and drive. Keep your eyes on the road. Eye on the prize. To the road. Keep your mind on the road. Mindfulness. Avoid aggressive driving. Drive with your low beam headlights on day and night. Drive defensively, not offensively. Drive defensively like other people are going to have erratic behaviors. Obeying the traffic laws and wearing your seatbelt. In about 1/3 of all of the fatal auto-involved cycling accidents, either the driver or the rider was drunk. Most fatal collisions are caused by cyclists' errors. To avoid accidents, avoid alcohol, wear reflective clothing, know your hand signals, avoid phone use or listening to music. If you have earbuds in, you're very likely, you're probably not going to hear a horn honking or other things going on in your environment. So it's distracting, and always wearing a bike helmet. Drowning is the 5th leading cause of unintentional injury death among Americans of all ages. And young Americans aged 15 to 24 experience the most drownings at about 507 per year. And so some of those risk factors include lack of swimming ability, lack of barriers, a failure to wear life jackets, temperature extremes that cause hypothermia, riptides and other hazardous conditions, excess alcohol use. Most drownings occur during water recreation when people unexpectedly find themselves in dangerous situations. So to help be safe around and in the water, some precautions to take are learning how to swim, learning CPR. Don't drink alcohol or take drugs before swimming. Are you guys getting a theme here with drug and alcohol use? I hope so. Pay attention to the water temperature. Check the depth. Never swim in a river with currents that are too swift or easy. And watching for riptides. Boating. Of those who died from drowning during a boating accident in 2015, 85% were not wearing a personal flotation device, a life jacket. Alcohol consumption was a leading factor in boating deaths. There's that theme again. Injuries within the home typically occur in the form of poisonings, falls, or burns. A poison is any substance that is harmful to your body when ingested, inhaled, injected, or absorbed through the skin. Drug overdose is the leading cause of accidental death in the United States, with over 52,000 legal drug overdoses in 2015. Over 20,000 of those deaths were prescription pain reliever overdose deaths. So they're medications that have been prescribed by doctors, and people have experienced poisoning overdose as a result. In 2015, the 55 poison control centers in the United States logged over 2.1 million calls for assistance with human poisoning. And this can even be drug interactions, right? Prescribed drugs and then somebody decides to use them with alcohol or takes them with another drug that they've been prescribed. So talk to your doctors or pharmacists, read the labels before you start mixing anything. Falls are the third most common cause of death from unintentional injury. And so some safety measures include keeping the floor and stairs clear from objects. Don't be a klutz. Avoiding use of small scatter rugs and mats that you can easily trip over. Training pets to stay away from the feet. Installing those slip-proof mats in tubs or showers, using appropriate step stools and ladders. In 2014, more than 3,500 Americans died in a fire. The primary causes of fires in campus housing are cooking, use of candles, careless disposal of smoking materials, faulty wiring, and arson. Impaired judgment from alcohol is a major contributor. Tips to prevent these fires include extinguishing all cigarettes before bed, setting lamps and candles away from combustibles, things that could blow up, keeping hot pads and kitchen cloths away from stove burners, using caution when lighting the barbecue grills, not overloading electrical circuits. Just because there are 7 plugs does not mean you have to have 7 plugs with 7 more on top. Having a proper fire extinguisher ready and replacing the batteries and smoke alarms. So we went over a lot. I hope you're able to digest some of this before we come into class, and that we have a really good discussion on how to keep ourselves safe from violence and injury. Until Thursday, may you be well and take care of you.